Hello and welcome to the Success Showcase. I'm your host, Eric Lopkin with the Modern Observer Group. And with me, as always, is Chip Janiszewski from the Happiness and Success GPS. How's it going today, Chip?
Let it snow, let it snow. It's going great, Eric. We got another snowstorm today, but it's not supposed to accumulate to anything, so I'm not worried about it. How are you?
Yeah, it is amazing that Connecticut had no snow up until February 1st, and then all of a sudden we've had feet,
Yep, including the first foot on February 1st.
Yes.
But that's the way
Although
it
has been a very strange winter, or strange February weather-wise. The state of Texas had its first ever winter weather advisory for the entire state. They went without power for a couple of days because of the snow down there. And it's a lot different. It only takes a few inches down there to knock things out. They're not prepared for plows and things like that.
Yeah, and it's also so cold down there too. I mean, my son's in-laws live in Houston, and unfortunately, they lost a lot of their beautiful foliage in the yard from all the cold weather too. So, but they're bouncing back. We always do, but it's just too bad what happened down there.
It is. So today we're going to talk about presentations, and whether you have to make a presentation to your boss, to a committee, to an audience, the basics stay the same. But of course, now we're doing more and more of these over Zoom. So I think it's a good time to look at some of those basics and look at some of the tech we're using to make them even better now.
Yeah, it's funny. One of the points from a couple of years ago is do a test run for your presentation. And now what is it? Obviously, you can't do it live. You got to check out technology and so on and so forth. But, I do like to get back to the old TED Talks template. And, he talks about emotion, which is speaking with passion, mastering the art of storytelling, having a conversation with the audience instead of preaching to them, and then making it novel. In other words, they have to learn something. And, Bill Gates talked about delivering jaw-dropping moments and so on and so forth, and keeping it light, and then keeping it memorable and succinct and whatever, keeping it to 18 minutes. So those principles are still really, really important. But obviously the content and putting it together is so important. And, as you mentioned, making it apropos so that we can deliver it properly and in an exciting fashion using Zoom and other, virtual technology is so important. So it's the times are changing, and yet in many ways they're staying the same as far as the tips go.
Exactly. I mean, in terms of the technology, Zoom actually makes it so much easier for you to rehearse, because you can sit down in front of your computer, have a Zoom just you, and record it so that you can see how the presentation looks. And that's something that we didn't have when we're doing these live. We've now got this instant playback so we can see how we're doing.
Yep. Of course, on the other side of the coin, you and I have both done Zoom presentations too, and it's kind of tough talking to a screen instead of an audience, and keeping things exciting and flowing and that kind of stuff also, especially if, I like to use PowerPoint presentations and basically the TED Talks thing is, all you have is pointers on there. You're not reading off of the slides, but obviously it's really, really important to be showing the people that instead of just your face on a Zoom thing. And so it's totally different. However, Zoom, if you realize this as a speaker, if you have 30 or 40 people in there and you're normally in a room talking to people are going to lose their concentration because you're standing up in the front of the room. They can't see you. But by using the ability to stare directly into the camera while you're talking to them, you're having individual conversations all of a sudden with 40 people like you're just talking to them. So that's a big plus.
And it is different doing a presentation on Zoom than it is in person. And I realized this the hard way. I had a live presentation scheduled just before everything went into lockdown last year. And it was changed to a Zoom presentation at the last minute. And as I was starting the presentation, I suddenly realized my entire introduction relied on having a live audience and being able to get feedback from them. So I had to change the presentation on the fly to make it work over Zoom. So there is differences. Now people have gotten a lot more used to Zoom, so they understand about raising a virtual hand and how to respond with the speaker. But right at the beginning, when you were asking for feedback, when you said something and you expected people to raise their hands, people had cameras turned off. They, if they had raised their hands, I wouldn't have even known. So there is a difference, and you do have to adapt to that difference.
Yeah, you got to kind of format things where, you have a specific Q&A in there as opposed to, having people interact during that. Because obviously if people are, chiming in while you're talking and a few people have their microphones on at the same time, that messes everything up also.
Yep. It's true. So you do really need to take the medium into consideration when you're presenting. But I mean, the basis of any presentation, whether you're in person, on Zoom, on a conference call, whatever it is your content. And that really does need to be strong. And something, I was actually at a presentation a few weeks ago, and I was actually disturbed by the content. The presentation was about the importance of businesses being socially conscious and having them work with their community and be a benefit to the community. Now, this is something that I'm a big proponent of. The presentation, however, the information given was skewed to make it fit that topic. And they gave as an example the company Bombas. Now, for those of you not familiar with this company, this is a sock company, and for every pair of socks they sell, they donate a pair of socks to homeless shelters. And the presentation was all about the fact that this was the most successful company ever to come out of Shark Tank. And the reason it was so successful was because it was doing something for the community. And while it may very well be the most successful company that ever came out of Shark Tank, the actual facts don't fit that supposition. The fact of the matter is, first of all, being the most successful company to come out of Shark Tank, Fortune magazine did a study, and 78% of the deals that are shown on Shark Tank never actually happen. So being the most successful to come out of this, you're talking about a very small group of companies that ever actually came out of it. And it completely ignored the fact that Bombas had by far the largest marketing budget of any of the Shark Tank companies. So to say they were a success because they were socially conscious ignored the fact that they were a success because they spent the most on marketing and people actually heard of them. When you're giving a presentation, it is important that your facts back up your suppositions. They match the topic, and you don't sort of cherry pick things like this that can be, pulled out and said, well, no, that's wrong.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when you're giving a presentation, I mean, it starts out, obviously, you have to show your passion, connecting with your audience, focusing on their needs, but concentrating on the core message is really, really important too. And I mean, I didn't see that or hear about that, but, if your core message is about how good you are as far as what you've done for other people, as opposed to what you're just actually doing, and let people think about that themselves, to me, it sounds a little bit arrogant there also, because it's really what it's all about. It's all about the audience, and you're looking to teach them something. You're looking to get them interested in different things and maybe helping out and that kind of thing. But your core message is really, really so important. So, if you're don't engage the audience up front, make them interested in you and start talking about things that interest them up front, I can imagine you're going to lose them very quickly, and it's really going to boomerang on you and backfire.
Exactly. You're talking to an audience. You have to keep them in mind. And don't underestimate what your audience knows. You don't want to overestimate. You don't want to get carried away with technical jargon or make assumptions in their knowledge. But you do have to figure that there's going to be people in your audience that if you're trying to make a point, you need your facts to be right.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's a few of those in every single crowd that are looking to call you on it. And some people actually just go to presentations. And it's easier now than ever because you can go from anywhere on Zoom to listen to anything. And if somebody's on there trying to nail you and you don't get the facts right or you're presenting them in the wrong way, it's a whole lot easier to get nailed because of the new technology.
Exactly. So, yeah, and regardless of the technology, once you have your facts right, you have to tell them in a compelling manner. And Chip, you mentioned earlier about telling a story, which is such a great way to do a presentation because the audience gets wrapped up in the story, they follow along, and you're really engaging an audience by telling them a story.
Oh, absolutely. And I know that that's how you start your presentations, which all of a sudden you couldn't do because you had to do it on Zoom. I can just imagine that saying, oh my God. But yeah, because I mean, obviously your presentations are amazing because of, what you put up personally and still are out there teaching the things that you teach.
Thank you. Yeah, telling stories is great because it does bring people in. And the more somebody can identify with the story, the more engaged they'll be. And it doesn't have to be a personal story. It can be a story about somebody else. It can be a story that is just an example. But the idea is you're telling a story. And it's something that we engage in from an early age. So not only do people find stories interesting because of the story itself, but it strikes an emotional chord. And it strikes a chord within all of us that really makes us relate to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a great way to connect with the audience. I mean, people obviously are looking for information, but they want to be entertained. They want to be able to basically identify with what you're doing, with what they're doing. And so it's so important to find different ways to connect. And I mean, obviously, when I talk about things, I talk about my journey to where I am because I talk about the power of positivity, turning obstacles into opportunities. And so I got to tell people how I got from point A to point B. And I talk about just the journey through life from a childhood to what I call the land of Saneville, which is really getting your mind all messed up by growing up and so on and so forth. So, I start with a picture of myself as a 2-year-old black and white picture from 1956 child. And basically we're born carefree and so on and so forth. And then we just walk through life happening and so on and so forth. And I use myself as an example as far as the experiences that I've had to get to where we are. And then, what I try and do is just identify with people saying, hey, I'm just like you folks. However, awareness, you got control of the present moment. And when you're giving your talks, I mean, that's something to keep in mind too. And if you can just touch on that and get them entertained for that present moment or wowed for the present moment, I mean, that's what you need to do because you want to be memorable afterwards too, to have them talking about you. Because obviously if you're doing presentations now and you want to do more of them, it's easier than ever to book more of them because you have a medium where you can deliver it anytime, anywhere without logistics.
Right. And, that's a very good point about being memorable. And something that helps people remember what you're saying is something that you actually do in your 4 P's presentation. And that's the alliteration of those P's. When you line up your ideas using alliteration. It makes it easy for the audience to remember. So, like using your presentation as an example, you come out, the 4 P's. Well, what can that be? And it immediately grabs people. And then you explain what those are, and the alliteration makes it easier for them to remember.
Yeah, I mean, I call myself the happiness success GPS, and I always start my presentation, my networking commercials with living life with the 4 P's: purpose, passion, positivity, and the plan is the formula for happiness and success, and turning obstacles and opportunities. Plain and simple. And, a lot of people know me very, very well, and they all have those 4 P's memorized.
And that's it. And it does make it easier. Being able to use the alliteration gets people to listen to it. It flows well. And that's important because you want your information to be as simple as possible for your audience to remember.
Yeah, and it's important to stick to a few points. And I know, you do your presentation on your book, Business, and it's very, very well organized as far as that goes. And I love the title to begin with. And but putting things down there simply is really, really important. When you're talking about slideshows for PowerPoint, especially these days, what you want to do is keep a minimum amount of slides with just a little bit of information on. Obviously, now when we're using video technology, virtual technology, you're going to have the slides up there a little bit longer, but it's still what you need to be doing is talking and keeping people interested instead of just having them reading up front. So making it interesting is really, really important.
Yeah, and that's something else. You mentioned the reading. You should not be reading your slides. The slides should be there to guide the audience, but you shouldn't be reading off of them. In fact, at Google, when they do presentations, they actually try to use an image rather than a picture. If you're standing there reading off of your slides, then why does the audience need to be there? They can read your slides after you're gone.
Yeah, I mean, what I do a lot is at the beginning of when I'm talking, because obviously I teach networking too, as you know, and there's a lot of tips for this. And I said, look, put down your pen. You don't have to take notes. I'm going to give you a handout afterwards that outlines all this stuff for you. And that way you can talk just off of pointers and engage people and not have them worrying about that. Because obviously it's a lot easier to get distracted when nobody's watching you when you're watching the Zoom meeting.
Right. I've done networking presentations as well. And the last one that I did live, I had no PowerPoint whatsoever. And I come out there and I say, take a look at this PowerPoint presentation, and I show them a blank screen. Why are there no slides there? Because networking isn't about reading something on a screen. It's about connecting personally. And I use that in the presentation to show them how to connect rather than reading something off of a screen. That interaction is so important.
Yeah, and obviously the way that you do that is instant engagement. They're saying, what the heck is this? And then, oh, wow, this is pretty cool. At least that's what I would be saying.
Yeah, that interaction is very important. And it's more difficult on Zoom to get a response from the audience. When you're doing it live, it's a lot easier. Also, in networking presentations, live presentations, I've started off, I ask the audience, okay, so how many of you here are introverts? And you'll get a couple of people raising their hand. And then I'll say, okay, so how many of you folks are introverts, but were too shy to raise your hand the first time I asked the question? And you will get more people raising their hand, but you'll also get people laughing because I'm playing off of it. And right there, I've automatically created a connection with the audience. Now you can do it, it's an old standard, you start off with a joke. And the reason you start off with the joke is to create that interaction with the audience. It doesn't necessarily have to be a joke. It can be doing something unexpected. It can be telling a story, but it's that connection with the audience that's important.
Yeah, I mean, in the book TED Talks, under the caption of novel, one of the captions is "lighten up," and so basically, it's not taking yourself so seriously. Starting off with fun brain teasers, this or that, or whatever, just like you were doing. As far as this is a blank screen, because that's what networking is about: relationships, not reading things, and so on and so forth. So it's really, really important to do that, and it's that does take a little bit more practice now that we're using this virtual technology. And
Yes.
but it's still fun to do that kind of stuff, and more than ever, people want to see that too.
It does take more practice on Zoom. It's always important to practice. It's it's the old joke, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. The more you practice your presentation, the more comfortable you'll be. And that's also crucial to your presenting, because the audience needs to see that you're comfortable. And the audience doesn't want to be sitting there watching you struggle through a presentation. They want to see somebody who's energetic, who's connecting with them. The worst possible example that you can use as, for a presenter would be Ben Stein in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, where he's standing there deadpan. Bueller, Bueller. You don't want to be deadpan. You want to be animated. You want to be relating to the audience, and you want them relating to you.
Absolutely. I mean, you have to be your authentic self, and everybody's different. I mean, you're going to say one message, and I'll say the same message, and we're going to deliver it differently because you're Eric Lopkin and I'm Chip Janiszewski, and people have got to see that rather than trying to be somebody else teaching you, as the voice of authority or the person who actually wrote the quote or any, that kind of thing. It's they're interested in you, and when we talk about networking, and obviously doing a 30-second commercial is a form of a presentation. We talk about people are interested in you. They're not interested in what you do. So the delivery and your value added is a whole lot more important than anything else there, because your purpose still and always will be to get an appointment to get to know people better, which obviously is so much easier now because you don't have to drive places and you can just set up a Zoom date. So it's really, really important to be your authentic self. And as we mentioned earlier, if you are having 30, 40 people on a Zoom thing and they're all looking at you at the same time, you have to be that way because they're all looking at you as if they're talking just to you as opposed to sitting in the back of a room.
Absolutely. There is nothing more important than being authentic. And that doesn't go for only presentations. It's in all aspects of your business. You don't want to be pretending to be somebody else. And I think something else that's very important that I know a lot of people struggle with is, what do you do when you make a mistake? And that's not as difficult to deal with as you might think. People get all flustered. They get embarrassed. The simplest thing to do is just say, play it off. It's like, oh, screwed that up. Let's try that again and move on. Accept you made the mistake. Admit you made the mistake and just keep going. Yeah, Nobody expects you to be perfect.
Yeah, I mean, you can have fun with it too and say, wow, I just made a mistake, but wait a second, there's only 10 minutes left and my quota per presentation is 3, so I still got 2 to go. Have fun with it.
Exactly. I think the best example that I've seen on how to deal with presentations when things go wrong was Johnny Carson. Because he did a monologue 5 nights a week, then later on, 4 nights and 3 nights as time went on. But those monologues very rarely went smoothly. He would fumble lines. He would tell a joke that nobody laughed to. And there was no going back. This was, live on tape. So there was no editing. He had to keep going, and he would play it off. And very often it was funnier watching him recover from a gaffe than the actual jokes were.
Yeah, and he actually made a character out of that came on periodically. I'm sure you remember Karnak the Magnificent, where he would read the answer to a question, and then he would say, "What is," as far as the question goes. And normally people would laugh, but he'd always come to one where people would boo him, and he'd come up with some, absurd comment to just go crazy on people. And it was, it was so much fun watching that.
So, yeah. So while it's important to be authentic, you can't worry about those mistakes. Real people make mistakes, and making mistakes actually does add to your authenticity. It helps put the audience at ease because they can go, "Oh, look, he's just like us." It helps them relate. And there was actually a scene in the television show Mad Men where a facilitator is doing a focus group, and she has them spell her name wrong on her name tag. And they forget to do that. So instead of having the name tag spelled correctly, she leaves it off and plays it off that they forgot to give her one. And the whole idea of this was because she wanted her audience to feel at ease with her, that she wasn't that important. She was so unimportant that they spell her name wrong. They forget to give her a name tag, and she's just one of the group. And that's become a very powerful message saying, yes, I am just like you. I've learned this stuff. And since I'm just like you, you can learn it too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the more that they can identify with you, it's actually inspirational to them because they say, "Hey, look, this person is up there speaking," and so on and so forth. And I'm just like they are, and I can go out and do this too, as far as presenting myself and that kind of thing. So the more human you are, the more authentic you are, the better off you're going to be as far as making an impression on them. So instead of looking down upon them, we're all human beings. We're all part of the same thing. So we just happen to be speakers. They happen to be there trying to learn something or have fun because of a presentation. And that's the way it is.
Exactly. When you're doing a presentation, it's about the information and it's about connecting with your audience. So if you have information right, if you've got your facts down, if you've practiced, then that connection can come naturally. And when you talk to your audience, you can be colloquial. You can play things off. You don't have to take everything seriously. But the most important thing is to be yourself and connect well. So we've only got a few minutes left. So Chip, what do you think is the big takeaway for our listeners this week?
Well, I mean, it's still important to be prepared and have your material down, but it is so, so important, especially the way things are these days, to continue to be your authentic self. That's the most important thing you can do, is just be yourself, have fun, and really just pour out your passion to the audience just by being you, because it's very, very unique, and everybody else is too. And the more you show them that, the more they're going to carry that forward themselves without even realizing it.
That's it. I think for me, the big takeaway is know your topic, rehearse it, and then have fun with it and connect with the audience. You're not a textbook. You shouldn't sound like you're reading from one. Make that connection and your presentation will go well and your audience will have great takeaways. You've been listening to the Success Showcase. You can catch us every week at xvadio.com/podcasts. You can also find us at the Apple Podcasts app, Google Play, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher, and wherever you find podcasts. Remember, make this your best week ever and make next week even better. We'll see you then.